Hi, everybody, and welcome to the virtual Brad Ashby Memorial Lecture, I Am Not a Spider, by Paul Richards. We are very pleased to have Paul Richards come and talk to us about not spiders, otherwise known as harvestmen. Paul has almost 4 decades of experience. He's a professional zoologist, a curator, and ecologist, and he specializes mainly in ground invertebrates. He's currently part of a Sheffield University research team looking at Heliconius butterfly wing development and mimicry evolution, which seems to be a topic for a future talk. He is also, for Sorby Natural History Society, the recorder for their millipedes, centipedes, woodlice, harvestmen, and pseudoscorpions. And he's written a number of books, including the BMIG Guide to Millipedes, Centipedes, and Woodlice, the New Atlas of Dragonflies in the Sheffield area, and the FSC Guide to British Harvestmen. Now, this is a really good guide to identifying harvestmen here in the UK, and the second edition will be out very, very soon. So do keep an eye out for the FSC Guide. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome Paul Richards, and I will just
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anka. I'm honoured to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak this evening, and it's great to see so many of you here from various parts of the world. I can't honestly say that I'm an expert on the harvestmen of Gibraltar and Norfolk Island and the Shetlands. Well, not been to the Shetlands yet, Keith, hint. Croatia, etc. Mainly focusing on British species, but there'll be a little bit of a world perspective as well. But without further ado, I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and I'm not quite sure what views you'll get of me after that, but let's see what we can do. So hopefully, whoop. There we go. Right, all being well, there's no one there to give me a thumbs up, but I'm assuming that you're seeing a slide that says I am not a spider.
Yes, fine, Paul.
Yes.
Excellent, and whether there's a picture of me to spoil the view, I'm not sure, but that's entirely up to you to rearrange your screens. Anyway, so as Anka has suggested, this is primarily about harvestmen. That is my primary qualification for speaking to you on this subject this evening, is that guide to harvestmen of the British Isles, which I can wave about if anyone can see me there. Some of you may have this. This is now out of print, and I will make reference to it later. But the version you can see down there is one of the drafts of the second edition, which is about to hit the stores when I finally approve the final drafts. So I think we'll crack on and see where we go. So Brad Ashby, I didn't actually ever meet Brad Ashby, but my understanding is that initially he started out as an ornithologist, hence the fact we're starting with a bird, which would presumably be the enemy of harvestmen at this point in the talk, so that's the last one of those we'll be seeing. As an ornithologist, that he diversified his interests later on, became quite an entomologist and photographer. So really, I think what I'm here to encourage tonight is to continue that diversification, to look at some of the creatures that perhaps you haven't considered before, and in the same way that Brad Ashby did, perhaps just pursue wider interests than you maybe currently do. He was also a keen photographer, I understand, and that's really how I got into harvestmen. They are really very photogenic, they're a really good subject, they are very well behaved, very easy to catch, and they don't race off too quickly, and they'll sit still. So they're a very good photographic subject. So if you're interested in photography, again, regardless of what you make of their natural history, they're a really interesting subject for particularly for the macro photographers. So that little beast there, that's our first sign of our Harvestmen, and we'll move on to them shortly. I'm just giving a quick plug here. I'm into the idea of diversifying what people look at and record. I'm very passionate about biological recording and invertebrates in particular. And I did a talk for the Teniptera project last year, which some of you I think possibly attended, about lesser known invertebrates. And some of them were pretty obscure. Some of them were very small, and some are quite tricky to identify. But the Harvestmen are a very good, easy starting point. They're a very good introduction to arthropods and recording in general. So for anyone who doesn't have a wealth of experience of invertebrates, I would recommend Harvestmen. They're a very, very good start. And I used to always plug them with any kind of students or anyone that came when I used to work at the museum looking to get into something. I would always point people at Harvestmen, because there was just a bit of a feedback there. But a very good starting point. You can go online as well if you wanted to see the rest of that talk, but that's not what I'm here to plug. So what I am going to be talking about this evening roughly is, well, if they're not a spider, what are Harvestmen? Why on earth you might want to look at them? A quick plug for some resources and keys to actually help you to identify and recognize what it is you're looking at. Some life history, brief bits about ecology, a few main characteristics so you can recognize them and use the keys, and a very, very short selection of British species just to give you a starter and an idea of one or two things that you might find in this country. And as Edgar suggested, some questions at the end we'll have time for. So, without further ado, I usually start a talk like this with considering questions of what sort of public perception there is of these groups, and perhaps draw on mythologies and folklore and literature and other sort of popular reference to Harvestmen or whatever creature we're talking about. So
It's disappeared.
Sorry, Paul, you've been muted. Sorry about that.
I've been muted.
Just unmute, yeah.
Okay. We don't want to be muted. Well, actually, I mean, maybe just like pictures. Do the silent version. I do sign if it helps. Did we miss much? Were we on this slide as you lost my voice?
Yeah, you just come onto this side as we.
Okay, that's cool. Thanks, Kieran. As I say, that's pretty much the sum total of information of sort of the stuff that's out there that most people perceive about Harvestmen. They're really not a very well-known popular group as such. There's not much in literature about them. People rarely reference them. You come across a lot of discussion about daddy longlegs, but then, as we'll see in a moment, that can be fraught with confusion. So why on earth? Well, it's because they're often quite small creatures. They're usually hiding in dark places. They're probably out at night. So secretive little beasts that perhaps people don't encounter that often, apart from when they see them just sitting on walls. They probably think of them as fairly dark-coloured, uninteresting creatures. But hopefully I'll be able to dissuade you if that's your opinion this evening. The only real, well, there's one startling thing which is in the art world, which I can start by picking up on. I'll just move my screen about. Salvador Dali painted this painting called Daddy Longlegs of the Evening Hope in 1940. It's pixelated and obscured because of the copyright, and if this is going on to YouTube, I don't have direct permission for that picture to appear, but do go and search it out if you're not familiar with it. But the key point is there's a Harvestman in the middle of it. It's called Daddy Longlegs of the Evening, and clearly he refers to Harvestman as Daddy Longlegs. And so it is the central focus of this work of art, and it's actually, if you want what the picture's actually about, there's Cupid sitting down in the corner over here, grieving. The world is in torment, and the Second World War is underway. The human being figure is wasting away and decaying, and Cupid's very distressed. But the Harvestman is sitting there as a symbol of good luck and hope within this otherwise bleak outlook. So, if nothing else, Harvestmen should be considered as something hopeful and of good luck. So, leave you with that as a perfectly good reason to look at Harvestmen. But it's a fascinating painting. So, yeah, do go and look at that at your leisure. So, what are Harvestmen? They are arachnids, but not spiders, hence the whole point of this talk. 8 question mark legged arachnids. Both of the Harvestmen in these pictures, one has 7 legs, one has 4. They function relatively well without all of their legs, so it isn't a prerequisite for it to be a Harvestman for it to have all of its 8 legs. So you may find them with considerably fewer. I believe that 3 is just about as far as they can go before they fall over and are non-functioning. There's some interesting things on YouTube where people have shown the complete change of gait as they've removed legs, and they're fascinating the way they completely change their way of locomotion. But we don't have any pictures of that for you. So I haven't been around pulling off legs to demonstrate any of these things for you. If you're not keen on spiders, which is possible, I think Harvestmen are very different. So if spiders are not your thing, stick with us. I have to admit, I'm not really the greatest spider fan in the world. I may be a member of the British Arachnological Society, but I'm not particularly fond of house spiders and any form of spider really, but I am getting there. So it's just it's many, many years of therapy is what I'm having, aversion therapy. I'm seeing a lot of arachnids. But spiders and Harvestmen obviously very closely related. So they're all arthropods in the Chilistrata. And so the Harvestmen sit there with the mites, pseudoscorpions, and full-blown scorpions in the order Opiliones. And they differ from spiders in a number of key characteristic ways. They have a single body, so there's just one mass of body. However you want to describe that, it's a single fused item, and both in an insect you'd have the head, the thorax, the abdomen. In a spider you'd have the opistoma, the prosoma, or cephalothorax and abdomen, with a waist in the middle. With a Harvestman, it's all a single unit. So that's a very key, obvious difference. So if you see something with a waist of any sort, it's not a Harvestman. The other obvious character of spiders is they produce silk, so they have webs. The only way you're going to see a Harvestman in a web are 2 reasons. One, it may be scavenging on something that's in a spider's web that the spider's killed, and it's foraging for food there. Or it is the food, and spiders will definitely eat Harvestmen, although as we'll see later, the Harvestman does have some defenses to protect itself from predation. But if it's in a web, it's either eating or being eaten. It hasn't produced it itself. Another thing which is relatively obvious, if you see this single-bodied creature, the second pair of legs are always longer than the others. So as you can see quite clearly in those photographs, they have these long antenna-like second pair of legs, which is not a feature of spiders. The other thing is the eyes are very different. They only have two eyes. Harvestmen have just got the two prominently fixed eyes on a turret on the top of the head. There isn't really a head as such. You could say that this turret's on its back, I guess. But you have usually some kind of raised promontory at the top with an eye either side, but just two. This turret is called an Ocularium, and it's very specific character of Harvestmen. Spiders usually have 6 or 8 eyes, as you're probably familiar. That's a jumping spider with 6, and so that's quite clearly a difference. They've just got the 2 in a Harvestman. The other, it's really quite a very different thing, form of reproduction in Harvestmen. Spiders go through the performance of the male wrapping up a little parcel of sperm, leaving it on a web, running away so he doesn't get eaten by the female, who picks it up and uses that to fertilize her eggs. All that performance doesn't take place with Harvestmen. They directly copulate with an intromittent organ. So male Harvestmen have a penis. If they encounter each other, a male and a female Harvestman bump into each other and they just mate. She has an ovipositor which she extends to lay her eggs, but also as part of this process his penis comes out from an operculum underneath, and they just simply mate and walk off. So that's very, very different to reproduction in spiders. And because of it, the penis is a really useful diagnostic character if you've got a male specimen. In 2003, in Aberdeenshire, a fossil was found, which was obviously a male Harvestman. It had a distinctive penis, and it was at the time considered to be the oldest penis ever seen. And it was 400 million years old, and that's the first known penis in the history of the world until quite recently. In fact, it was virtually the same year that an ostracod, a slightly older, a mere 25 million years older, also had a penis. So the second oldest penis in the world was that of a Harvestman. So I mentioned the word daddy longlegs earlier. It's used for a number of different things. This is the daddy longlegs spider. So this one is a spider, also known as cobweb spider or cellar spider, Pholcus phalangioides. And you can see the waist between the prosoma and that abdomen, the sort of front and back bit. So there's a waist there. So it's evidently a spider. It's also sitting in a web. And so that is the daddy longleg spider. I'm happy to call that daddy longleg spider. I stick to Harvestmen for the creatures that we're talking about tonight to try not to have the confusion between the two. The other kind of daddy longlegs, I certainly grew up calling crane flies daddy longlegs, but they of course have 2 wings and 6 legs, so very different. So any other characteristic differences? Well, another big one is spiders are venomous. Despite that, little soil Harvestman looking every inch like a tarantula, it's only about 5 millimeters long, very small. Spiders are venomous. There is no venom in a Harvestman. If you go online and search Harvestman or daddy longlegs, there are myths out there that always say that the daddy longlegs has the most potent venom of any creature, and its fangs, but perhaps its fangs don't puncture human skin, so perhaps that's why it's not killing people all over the place. A lot of nonsense in that statement. They don't have fangs at all. No Harvestman has fangs. They have little pincers, and they have no venom. So they cannot be have the most potent venom and be the most poisonous creature in the world. if people are possibly talking about daddy longlegs spider, their fangs are quite small and are unlikely to pierce human skin. Maybe at a pinch they might in a very soft area, but pretty unlikely. I think if you've ever encountered that statement, it's possibly because there is footage or photographs of Pholcus species of spider killing redbacks in Australia, which are a very, very poisonous spider. So therefore, if it's killing a very, very poisonous spider, then it must be a very, very poisonous spider itself. Well, it's not particularly true, but nonetheless, that may be where it's evolved. Anyway, Harvestmen, not venomous, don't have fangs. So anything you read like that on the internet, it's not true. The other thing that people possibly perceive about Harvestmen is there are these little tiny bodies on very long legs. And that's generally true in this part of the world. Certainly, they are gangly limbed things with a little body in the middle. But it's not entirely true. It's not typical of British species even. And there are a number where the legs are barely longer than the body, such as this species here. So, quite varied, but they may be long-legged, they may be a daddy longlegs, but not always. Also may be called shepherd spiders. Some people may still call them shepherd spiders in this country. It's a strange name, needs a little bit of explanation as to why. Thomas Muffet in 1589, he of Little Miss Muffet fame, suggested that the English call it shepherd either because it's pleased with the company of sheep, or because shepherds think that the fields are full of them, are good and wholesome for their sheep pasture. Neither of those are likely to be terribly true. I've never seen large gangs of harvestmen hanging out with flocks of sheep, but perhaps I'm not looking closely enough. There is a much more sensible explanation for the name shepherd spider. The name Opiliones, the order name that I mentioned earlier, Opilio actually means shepherd. It refers to shepherds. So they do belong to an order which reflects this name. So although they're not shepherd spiders, they are spiders, they are often called shepherd spider. And it's not unreasonable because of this name Opilio, which is a generic name for a number of species in this country and elsewhere. But shepherd, why shepherd? Well, certainly in the distant past in Europe, shepherds walked around on stilts to count their sheep so that they get above their flocks. So it was one method that shepherds were well known, stilt walkers. And as you can see, it doesn't take much of a stretch of the imagination to see a stilt walker like that with an additional stick walking through a field of sheep and consider harvestmen as being very similar. So I'm convinced that that's really where the name shepherd and Opiliones is derived. The question also arises, well, so I call them harvestmen. Why harvest? What have they got to do with harvest time? Well, they do tend to, the majority of the more obvious species do occur in harvest, autumn time, late summer. They are more prolific and obvious at those times. You do also see some of the larger species in grassland and probably in sort of fields and cropped areas where you might associate them particularly with harvest. And if the whole village used to go out to bring in the harvest, they probably encountered them a lot. So the harvest spider, the harvest creature, the harvestman is not unreasonable. But also there's an interesting defense mechanism that they have is if you pull off the leg, and again, I didn't do this and video it for your benefit. One day, if I find one, I will film it. But they have a small pacemaker in the limb, and when the leg is pulled off, if they're escaping something, if a predator is what's left with is a twitching leg, this little pacemaker in the leg makes the leg of the Harvestmen twitch, and that's a sort of scything motion. So it's also considered that this scything motion of the leg may possibly be why they're called Harvestmen as well. And this is sort of further borne out by the fact that the French and the Welsh names for Harvestmen both mean reaper. So it all goes back to reaping and scything and harvest again. So you get that kind of action. The leg is doing that kind of scything motion to distract the predator. So that's the story I'm sticking to anyway. So again, why not look at them? Well, I mean, I'm very passionate about Harvestmen. I really find them fascinating. I just think they are just in of themselves fantastic. They look amazing. They have the most amazing look. They have armor and defensive structures. They're quite beautifully colored in many cases as well. And I just think they're a fascinating creature. Quite small, but when you have a good look at them, they are quite amazing. And I have my own little theory that if they were bigger, they don't have to be much bigger, but if they were just large enough for people to see, I think they would be more, or at least as popular as sharks and dinosaurs with small children. We'd see people with toy Harvestmen as well as toy dinosaurs because they are so fantastic. They just need scaling up a little bit. So of the 7,000 species recognized in the world, there are some amazing looking things. So I'm just going to flash through. Those of you in different parts of the world joining us this evening, you might recognize something from nearer to home. But this is just some of my favorite Harvestmen from around the world, and thank you to the various people that gave me permission to use these images and to be shared on YouTube. But I won't go into much detail. I should let them speak for themselves. But there are some fantastic things. They're multicolored, metallic colors, spines all over them, long, huge palps and mouth parts for chewing at food and capturing food. These spines are an ongoing character and feature. You get like they also look like disguise themselves as bird droppings. There's a nice bird dropping with a two-pronged spike. This thing's awesome. It's not only got the spike, but it's got its extending palps for capturing things at a distance, like a bucket of a digger. There it is, extended. Quite a stunning beast, and some of them they'll fluoresce at night if you shine UV on them. That's our friend again, which is just one of my favorites. Two spines and bright orange, fantastic. And look at that, these palps at the front are where they capture their prey. So you can imagine you've no chance in that kind of basket, that Iron Maiden of spikes that just catches prey, and there's no escaping from that kind of weaponry. Again, fantastic spines everywhere, but also beautifully colored, fantastic patterns. And I mean, talking of Iron Maidens with these spines that capture that cage of offensive weapon at the front there is amazing. Just an enormous blunt spike on that one, and just bulges everywhere. They can also catch things at the back. So their hind legs have also got spines on. As you can see there, they'll capture things backwards and pass it forwards, not always with their palps at the front. They get beautiful coloration. Obviously, that one wears ice hockey mask as a defense mechanism. Fascinating base with little eyes shining through there. I'm very fond of this one with its false eyelashes and its red lipstick, but just amazing. And I have no words for that. That's amazing. And then there's the bunny Harvestman, which is just quite a ridiculous looking thing, but awesome. So that's a quick tour around the world of some of the most outrageous looking Harvestmen. But in this country, they're pretty cool too. The thing at the front used to be considered as the sort of, in volume terms, the biggest Harvestman, and the thing lurking in the background is a recent invasive species. So there's quite a lot of variety of size. That on the left is a new recent discovery, a species in Britain, Scotilemon dorii, which is very small and mite-like. It looks larger in the foreground here, but it's actually very small. And that's the new invasive Leobunum limbatum, which is many, many times bigger. But so a lot of range of size. We have similar armature, this Megabunus with lots and lots of spines and defensive and offensive weapons, horns at the front, scimitar-like spikes, daggers, if you like, in the mouth parts for capturing prey. Interesting spines on the back, not one, not two, but 10. And that last one was Hystricostoma. This is the Scotilemon again, entirely amber coloured with these incredible spines and this orange textured surface to the body. Completely spine covered palps with like a boxing glove on the end. Tremendous beasts. Or enormous fat tridents at the front and tremendous patterns and colours. So just a quick flick through some of the British species there. This is Odl Spinosus. And the other great thing about them, apart from them looking amazing, is they're really quite easy. I mean, just as you've seen there, quite distinctive characteristics, quite obvious things. So of the 33 currently known British species, probably at least 26 of them are really very distinctive. These things, they're distributed quite widely as well, so it's not like the sort of species that perhaps cling to the south coast and perhaps not everyone in Britain can see them. Right across the country, and in fact in the very north of Scotland, there are species up there which we don't get down here. So there's a good range. So wherever you are, there's some very interesting specialities. Sheffield's very good for them, I have to say. A good place to come and see some interesting and unusual Harvestmen. So of the 26 that are pretty distinctive, there are then perhaps 7 which need a little bit more attention. Perhaps 2 of those need you to look at the genitalia, but otherwise the characters, it's just a matter of perhaps a slightly better hand lens or a better microscope. So pretty easy things to identify in all honesty. They're also easy to find. They're not difficult things to locate, and as you perhaps are well aware, they'll just sit on a wall. They'll just sit quite happily on a wall, not moving, which is about as easy as it gets, really. And all year round. So it's not an insect that you can only find in the summer months. So all in all, I hope I'm selling Harvestmen to you as a good proposition for you to pay some attention to. And thank you for coming this evening and paying some attention to them now. They're also quite under-recorded. It's getting better, there are a lot more people looking at them, but because they have been under-recorded, there are some really good opportunities. It's a great group for finding new species to your area, to the country. And there are lots of opportunities, for you to just find things that have not been seen before, and things are cropping up all the time, as you'll see in a moment. So this is my back garden in Sheffield. It really isn't anything special. It's just like lawn and pots, nothing desperately. It's not the most wildlife friendly environment. The walls, the Harvestmen like the walls, and if you want to find Harvestmen in a garden like that, go around the edges, weed your drive, that kind of thing. That's where they're all lurking. So nothing special, and yet in 2007, I was playing with my daughter in the garden. I saw this Harvestman, picked it up, wondered what on earth that was. and thought, I don't recognise you. And that was the second British record of Opilio canistrinii, which had previously just appeared once before in Essex. And it's a very significant creature as well, so it's nice as a recorder just to see something new. But this particular one was well known for having worked its way up from Italy through Europe as far as Denmark and Holland. It had made that leap and to that one single record in Essex before we found it in Sheffield. And in starting to look around, we found the third, fourth, fifth, and now it's quite a widespread species, and reflecting this movement up through Europe that we've seen. It's worked its way up into Scotland, and in its wake, as it's made its way northward, one of its cousins, Opilio paratinus, has declined and is hardly seen in some places. And so we are seeing, because they've not been so well recorded, it's difficult to make any sweeping statements about they were here once and now they're not. But certainly I see fewer of those other species, its cousin, than I do. This is really quite a common species now. So that's quite a major impact on ecology that you can observe quite rapidly. I mean, let's say just 2007 that this thing arrived, it's now everywhere. And the other species, it seems to be well on the decline. So in 2010, same back garden, just to show how easy it is, folks, to find new species to Britain. This was in my back garden while I was cementing a wall, saw this thing, wondered what it was. And lo and behold, it was quite distinctively different to anything I'd seen before. New species, Platypus Ponotorum, always female, and in my garden. I've never seen a male yet. It is parthenogenetic. But having seen it, I was just about to finish writing this guide to Harvestmen. It was virtually ready for the printers. So we had to stop press effectively and add this species in at the very last minute. So that it was as up to date as we could get it. Obviously, by producing a field guide or something of this nature, which claims to be having all of the native species, or at least those represented in this country, you immediately put it out there with the intention that it goes out of date as soon as possible, because people will start finding things that aren't in it. Well, it was a bit quicker than anticipated, but as soon as it came out, someone, thank you, Trevor, in Workshop, sent me a photograph of one he'd seen the year before, Laburnum species A, which was one we were kind of waiting for, because again, it was one that had appeared in Europe and was moving around. But lo and behold, there it was in Workshop. Soon it was in Barnsley up the road. Someone found it in Wales. I found it in Sheffield in 2016, and it's in quite a few places around here now. And it's a very big harvestman. It's a two-hander, as I refer to them. You have to, if you want to walk across your hands, you need both hands. It's a big old thing, not easily missed. So it wasn't around much before, but bringing out a new guide, it's a sure way of people to start finding new things. So that's Laburnus species A. But subsequently, other new things have started to appear, which is great, and this is what we want. Some of them are new, some of them perhaps we just didn't recognise before, and perhaps some is because people have become more enthused and encouraged to record them. But since 2017, we've had 5 new British species, and these things don't look all the same. They're not all just little brown jobs with subtle nuances and DNA required to identify them. They all look really different, as you can see there. These 3, the one up here, Dicynopalpus caudatus, is one that you do need to dissect because it looks exactly like Dicynopalpus ramosus. which everyone used to be able to recognise by its tuning forks. But as we learn more about them, we're starting to be able to recognise the morphology, and hopefully we might be able to help people to identify them soon without dissecting them. But they all look very, very different. And the other two are these, which again, very, very different. That great big Labuna limbatum, another two-handed Harvestmen, really long legs, and a tiny, tiny Hystricostoma argentiolunatum, which someone found in lockdown, the first lockdown, saw it once and then couldn't go back to get it because he got COVID, and we had to wait some weeks before he was able to be released from lockdown and feeling better, well enough to go and find another one for us, but it has been confirmed, so that's lovely. So in 12 years, that's a 27% increase in the British fauna, which is pretty exciting by any stretch of the imagination. And as you can see them all there, really very different, lovely creatures. If that wasn't enough, there might be a 6th new species, which is in the last few years cropped up in December on the Facebook group in Guernsey. Andy posted a picture of a creature like this, but we can't confirm if it's a new one or not because we need a male. It's just a bit tricky from a female. It might be also slightly immature. If this is a new species, that'll be a 30% increase in species in that timescale. So yeah, it's all happening in the world of Harvestmen. So there's never been a better time. It's really, it's about as exciting as it gets. It's like discovering a new tropical island and just trying to record all the species that are there. It's maybe I exaggerate, but they are there waiting for you to find them. So do start looking more at them. And to that end, we've created a number of resources for you. Obviously, we're starting with this is now out of print with the Field Studies Council, but hot off the press very, very soon. We should have the 2nd edition, which now includes all of those species. There will be a delay if the one in Guernsey proves to be different. I've actually found a photograph of one that looks identical from Sheffield. So I've got to determine if we've got, once we can find a male, if it's Nalima gothica or if it's Nalima species, one of a number of others. In which case I'm going to have to find a bit more space because I've already had to go on to side 2 to include photographs. I tried to have a male and a female of each species where that's relevant, and so we've gone over onto the B side of the chart, but that also means I have to also add an extra description into this. So fun and games, but it's almost there. And if the one from Guernsey, or if we may just put a line that says other species are also occurring, which I'd rather not do, but let's see how we go. So anyway, look out for that in the next few months. Also, there's the Facebook group I mentioned, which is an excellent way of finding out on the day that someone's found something unusual or that something new has cropped up or been identified. The Facebook groups are excellent for that, and UK Harvestmen is really, really active, and do join that if you have any interest in Harvestmen after this talk. There's even an advert there for a Brad Ashby memorial lecture, which sounds interesting. I must go. There's also the British Arachnological Society page, the recording page for spiders and Harvestmen, which has lots of environmental and ecological information in there, descriptions of species, maps, and other information. So recommend that, and that's being updated a lot currently by Meg Skinner. Thank you, Meg. And there's also the Rich Berkmar and I put together the FSC Identikit online. So this is another free resource to help you identify Harvestmen, and it allows you to put in characters that you can see and describe them. So you can, it's a multi-access key. You can put in whatever you want. You haven't got to follow through a dichotomous, is it this, is it that? And it will then rise to the top the species which is the most likely candidate that you're looking at. So for example, on this one here, if you go to the bottom, in other dorsal markings, if you just put it's all black with 2 pale patches, that will immediately throw it right to the top as Nemastoma bimaculatum. So these things can be a bit clunky in some respects if you go trying to fill in every box as you go and describe the trident and the ocularium and the palps, and wonder, you get a bit bogged down. But if you just realize that there's one species which is black with 2 white spots, you don't need to use that key particularly, you just find it in here. But it will bring that cream to the top of the milk, so to speak. And then it will give you photographs. A lot of my images are on there. It will show you the maps and, again, field characters. So that's free, that's available, and we'll need to update that before long. But currently still quite popular with people. You can also compare if species, if you're trying to determine one thing from another, and do them side by side. You can even compare them taxonomically in all sorts of different ways. So try that out if you've never used a multi-access key. It sounds quite good fun. And finally, if you want to take this a bit further, I did for the Tuniptera project online on their YouTube channel. There are 3 long talks, about Harvestmen. So if you really want the detail, then that will help you to identify all British species. So that's enough of a plug for me. So that's sort of, yeah, just general stuff about them. I'm going to just explain a little bit about life history, behaviour and ecology, and not in too much more detail. You don't want to spend the whole evening with me, I'm sure. But they are basically, they live in the ground layer. You find them under logs and rocks and underneath things, under stones, in man-made areas and synanthropic sites, just as well as in urban rural sites. But they sweep. Sweeping's a good way of finding them. But of course, a lot of people just see them sitting on walls. They don't run away, and you can observe them very easily just sitting on walls, especially the long-limbed things. So easy to find. They're also a very significant predator. Excuse me. So they eat lots of things, and they're sitting on their walls waiting for things to walk past, an ambush predator basically. But they are also preyed on by a wide range of other species. So they're significant as they feed on things, but also as a food supply for a number of other things too. They have a very varied omnivorous diet. I think this slide has slightly moved there, so you can't quite see what it says. But they are basically a predatory creature. They have a variety of structures that help them in that. So they've got prominent eyes, they can see well. Some are slightly more forward pointing than others. Others are very much more defensive. They have pedipalps, these specialized capture organs. Is basically a little leg at the front, like a fifth pair of legs, if you like, for grabbing things at the front, for which they grab stuff and then they feed it into their chelicerae, these pincers that are hidden away underneath. So they're not fangs, they're much more akin to a crab's claws, and they just tear their food apart and then shove it into their mouths. We mentioned this long pair of second pair of legs. These are very much antennae, and they tap away and use these for sensory functions. There's an old Japanese name for Harvestmen, which basically means blind man, and it's the same. It's making reference to a sort of blind man's white stick tapping along as they find their way along, and that's what you see Harvestmen doing, as if these are testing the waters ahead of them, if you like. And they feed on anything really that's smaller than them, soft-bodied invertebrates in particular. So the obvious sort of aphids, leafhoppers, worms, and woodlice, things like that. But they'll scavenge, and if there's something which is perhaps exoskeleton's a bit tough normally and they can't get at it, or perhaps slugs and snails which are slimy, they'll feed on those as they decompose. They'll feed on decomposing fungus and bird and plant material. They'll even feed on bird droppings. So they really are quite omnivorous in that respect. In captivity, they're very relatively easy to feed, as easily as predators are usually quite difficult in captivity because you've got to usually give them live food. But if they like a bit of ham, they like a fatty bit of ham. That's quite lean that I've given there. I think that's very good looking ham I've given that one. But they're quite happy with a bit of fat. There are also species which specialize on feeding in snails, so they will actually go inside a snail shell and feed on living snails, and I will, if push comes to shove, feed them on snails and slugs in captivity. But basically, as I say, they're an ambush hunter, so in their little world they'll hang around and grab whatever walks past. They're very opportunistic, but the ones with the very long gangly legs are sort of just perched high up waiting, and will just drop down and grab things that have walked unknowing between their legs and just drop down, pounce on it from above and eat from that position. So ambush. They like moist habitats. They're very intolerant of water loss, and we do have to keep feeding them. If ever you're sending them in the post, I'm always very keen that they're not that they won't dehydrate. That I will, if that one's just arrived in the post for me from northern Scotland, and it's Laburnum gracilli, used to be called Tiskii, and that's I just give it a quick drop of water because it was thirsty, and they'll suck fruit juice or chew leaves if they can't find any free water. Another thing they do probably to preserve that humidity is they will form aggregations. It's not a common feature of many British species, but some of these more long-limbed ones do, and this species, Laburnum species A, which is the one that first appeared in Worksop a few years ago, they do form these big aggregations, so it's a pretty distinctive beast because of that. But it's been shown to because the humidity within all of these limbs is sort of contained a little bit, so it's quite good at stopping them drying out. And it's also very good defensively because you look like a bigger animal, and also like in a shoal of fish, it means that if a predator comes, then you've got less chance of it being you that gets eaten. So again, these aggregations have that benefit, but also they can be quite startling. This image here was sent to me kindly by Hay Wijnhoven in the Netherlands, showing quite an aggregation in a pipe in Portugal. I don't imagine what that's like to disturb, but if you are a predator and you are trying to catch one of those things, when these things move, it's a very startling thing. I have a very feeble version of that to share with you. If it'll, there we go, off they run, bobbing away. But if you're in a mass of harvestmen and you're a predator trying to eat that, and they all go away like that, that's going to be quite an effective defense. They have some interesting mating behaviors, which I won't go into in a great deal, but one distinct one, which you can see there, again, these long-limbed ones, the females tend to stay down low on the substrate, and the male will sit high above her, guarding her. So once he sort of courted her, or they've met and possibly mated already, he'll then protect her from above, and he'll protect her from other males. And there's all sorts of behaviours where the males will grasp each other and fight over the females and try and vie for position to get the female. But that's a whole other story. But there are quite a number of species which are also parthenogenetic, and some in this country which there are mostly only females, and the males are not essential for reproduction. Once they've mated, they lay their eggs in soil. So a lot of these invasive species, I call them invasive, they're more just, they've arrived. Whether they will invade and take over is another matter. But because they lay their eggs in soil, that's a very easy way for species to move around the world. So in a plant pot from France and brought to England, it's very easy for these things to emerge, especially if they're parthenogenetic. They don't need another male to find to reproduce with, and they will just generate the next generation. So they shed their skin, like most arthropods, hang upside down and drop out of the skin. Do that 8 to 10 times quite quickly, every 10 days or so, till they reach adulthood, and probably just live for a year or so. But this can happen in all sorts of times of year, sometimes continuously, depending on the species, sometimes in the autumn, sometimes spring, sometimes they'll overwinter as an egg, sometimes they'll overwinter as a younger individual. So all sorts of different life histories. Have a number of different defense mechanisms. We've already seen so many different methods of armament to protect them, and also camouflage, these color patterns, this little Megabunus diadema, very hard to see on lichen and moss, beautifully camouflaged little thing. But they'll also feign death as a means of defense. And you've seen the scattering and that bobbing. We call that Leobunum species A, tends to be called the green bobber, because it bobs when disturbed, bounces up and down, presumably to deter predators. A key and quite characteristic thing in Harvestmen, excuse me, is one of the things that they do is they are designed to shed their legs. Their legs will snap off at a predetermined weakened point. So they actually have a weak point. So if you pull the leg, it doesn't pull it off at the kneecap, it will pull it off at the trochanter where it wants it to break off, because there's a mechanism just behind that point for locking off to stop the loss of body fluids. And as they're so sensitive to moisture loss, this is really important. So you've got this system, and therefore there's a weakening area around that so that it doesn't snap somewhere else. So that's quite unique, really. And you can see here that locking off systems worked very effectively to prevent any further damage. And of course, the things run away because you're just left holding its leg. And they also, one thing which is very distinctive with Harvestmen is they, in various parts of the world, they're known for their smell. They have a repellent stink gland at the front, this odoriferous gland, which you can see in these points here, which is varies in how obvious that is. But you see them washing themselves and smearing a smelly liquid over their bodies. And that's very effective in deterring certainly ants and other predators, possibly not so much some large vertebrates, but it can be quite pungent. And in some parts of the world where the long-limbed daddy longlegs species don't really occur, daddy longlegs isn't a name for a harvestman, and some of their names more reflect this odor that they produce. So there are 3 Brazilian names as an example there: stink spider, garlic spider, or bad smell. Just simply bad smell, no messing about with that one. So yeah, they have this odor that they put all over themselves. So generally speaking, just very quickly, that's a very typical Harvestman. They're not a complicated beast. The names of the various body parts aren't unique. And most of you that have ever studied any kind of invertebrate or insect will recognize quite a lot of those terms. The Ocularium is probably the most distinctive thing. So they have pedipalps at the front for capturing prey. These may have bumps and lumps and sticky buds on them for catching things. They have the mouth parts, these jaws, these claws for tearing things apart, the chelicerae. They have spurs and projections, so you're looking for those kind of things like this spike at the front of this Rylina triangularis. The trident is a very nice character. It might not have much of a trident, perhaps just a couple of spines either side, or a really obvious Odl Spinosus has these really obvious spines, or you can have 3 equal spines, or one that's a bit longer, a variety of different things, but the trident at the front is a good character to looking for. The Ocularium may have different number of spines and bumps on the top of that, maybe flattened, maybe taller, maybe a different shape to others. The body might vary in how globular it is or flattened, so shape of the body is useful. And the saddle's a name that comes up a lot, so it might look obviously like a saddle in Mytopus morio, or it might be the saddle might be described as a series of dots and Paralegalopus medii there. But the saddle pattern on the back is helpful. The legs, what colour they are, what shape they are, what length they are, all very useful. They vary in relation to the size of the body of the animal. So you've got these sort of quite short legs on these, sort of medium length legs there. You've got the really, really very long limbed species, these so-called daddy long legs. So again, very obvious, distinct character there, which is quite helpful. So a combination of all of these characters makes it pretty easy. If you need to look more closely and absolutely confirm what you're looking at, you've got a male. The penis is really, really distinctive, often very characteristic, and can help you as that final sort of nail in the coffin as to what you're looking for. So just going to show you just one or two, just to finish off with a few British species, just so that you're familiar with some. And excuse me again. Nemostoma bimaculatum. Bimaculatum means it's got 2 spots. Very easy. It's black. It's got 2 white spots, silvery white spots, and largely unmistakable currently in Britain. Sometimes the spots are missing. There's a form here called unicolor, which is lacking the spots, but generally speaking, little black Harvestmen, 2 silvery white spots. It's Nemostoma bimaculatum. I shan't bore you with the issues that I think there may be some others in Europe. There are a few which are quite similar, and they may be lurking in our fauna. So these are the things that you might want to be looking out for. If you really want to find something new to Britain of interest, look closely at Nemostoma bimaculatum whenever you find it, because it could be a new species is lurking there. There are certainly 2 or 3 which, and I always collect males because I want to make sure that these are recorded properly. But it's an easy one for you. This was one that looks just like Nemostoma bimaculatum. This is the one that was found during lockdown last year by David Holland. But this one has the extra silvery white spots at the back, and these are sort of crescent moon shaped silvery spots, hence its specific name, Argentiolunulatum. It's silvery moon spots. And it's also the one with the 10 spines along the back. It also, if that wasn't enough, it's the males on the palps have got a nice little spur on the inside there. It's a lovely beast, very small, and a whole host of characters when you get down to the microscopic level that distinguish it from anything we've seen before. But it really is a beautiful little thing. And excellently. David's first one he found and said to me was a male and made life a lot easier, but the females are also quite distinctive too. But so that was new only recently. Odl Spinosus, put this one in because you might, it's a very garden kind of species. You might find this in your garden, and it's very obvious, these big orange chunky trident members at the front. I mean, there are little ones there as well, but it's got these three really chunky members to the trident at the front. It's a very granular surface. It's really quite an attractive thing, I think. Can be quite grey and murky, but this male down at the bottom here is quite beautifully patterned when you look at it closely. The other thing that's quite characteristic of them is this saddle is very truncated, sort of abruptly, quite dark black saddle, which is abruptly truncated at the end, and that's true in the male and the female with this big trident. So look out for Odl Spinosus, might well be in your garden. It's a very spidery looking thing. It's probably the most spider-like of our harvestmen. I mentioned Mitopus moreo before with the obvious saddle, but it's one that people recognise, I think, and see around. That hourglass sort of sand timer pattern, or number 8, if you like, black against a pale background is pretty distinctive in a male Mitopus moreo. The Phalangium opilio is the one with the big horns. You don't even need to bend down to see this. I can recognize this without moving if I see one of these horns at the front sticking out at the, and it's usually quite orange. It's really obvious. Obviously when you get closer, there are other characteristics as well, but these two spikes of these big horns are fantastic for recognizing this species, very easy. Those two species are fine if you've got males. This is just an example of one of what I would say is possibly a tricky species. The males are really easy, the females not so much. You can see there that the female Phalangium opilio and Mitopus moreo females, very, very similar. But again, if you look closely, there are two little white spines here which distinguish Phalangium opilio quite easily if you're looking for the right thing. But if you're not looking at the right things and you've not got a decent hand lens, it can be a problem. But anyway, the males, not a problem. Another fairly obvious one, Opilio canistrini, I mentioned on in Essex in my back garden in 2007. It's sometimes called the red harvestman. It's quite an orangey red. This is a male, but the legs are contrasting black. But the trochanters, the first segment of the leg, is the same colour as the body. So you can see this orange body. It's almost like star-shaped because the trochanters are the same colour as the body before they become the black legs. So quite distinctive, really. The female is possibly even easier in that she has more distinctly got these pairs of black and white spots all down the back. So, and that's a juvenile down here. So that, again, pairs of black and white spots. And if we'd gone back to the male, sometimes you can see these little black and white spots even in the male. So black legs, body coloured trochanters, black and white spots, and they both have kind of white rings around the eyes. This is the thing that it's interesting to record because it's quite a recent arrival in the country. If you've got this, do record it because, you know, it'd be nice to know how far it's spread, where it's really taking hold. Everyone's favourite, it seems, Megabuenus diadema, the crowned harvestman. It's not a big thing, it's very small. It's perhaps 6 millimeters long, its body, but it's got a crown on its head. You know, nothing else that you can mistake for that, that enormous crown on its head. And it's got a very spiny palps at the front, and the front pair of legs got all these spikes. It's a stunning thing. Mostly female, usually female, occasional males, but usually not. So it's parthenogenetic when it wants to be, and will happily reproduce from a single female that has just dropped into a location. But it really is a stunning beast. Quite a close relation to that. This is the one I found while building my wall. Platypus Ponotorum, these dagger-like spines, about 6 white spines on the palps here, really obvious. You can see them there. It also has a very broad ocularium, usually sort of russet coloured, chestnut kind of colour. A few little white specks here. Not many records of this. It's cropping up here and there around the country, so it'd be really interesting to record this. And the interesting thing with this one is it's quite an early one, so this is sort of March, April, May, June, when you don't really tend to see the other larger harvestmen around. So if you see something like this in May, sitting on your wall, as these were, and it's not small, it's not huge, but it's not a little thing. With these white spines, do record it. Really interesting to see where that's found its way. No males. I've never seen a male. There were no males found previously, but I think someone has recorded that in Yorkshire now, a single male specimen. So it's normally parthenogenetic, but occasionally they will produce males and reproduce sexually. But the males are all black, pretty much entirely black. So I've yet to see one of those. So this is a photograph one from Germany. That's just again showing you the same beast, just to get it in your head, so you can find one for me in your garden in the spring. Very big ocularium, very undercut at the back and slightly at the front, but these white spines, very distinctive. Another obvious little thing, one spike of an arrow head, trident at the front, 4 spines at the back, Omnivorous quadridentatus. The quadridentatus are these 4 teeth at the back, but it's also got a row of spines down the back. So really distinctive, very, very spiky legs, very easy to identify, this single trident and the 4 spikes at the back. There it is again. And a couple that you probably, they're not so straightforward to identify, but they're commonly seen. So I'll just give you a quick beginner's lesson in the last few minutes that I have. In fact, I should be finishing now. But Leobunum rotundum, males, classic little orange body, very long legs. So that's rotundum. That is Leobunum black walleye. Little orange body, long legs. What's the difference? The difference is that one of them has a white ring around the eyes and a dark line in the centre. The other one has a dark ring around the eyes and a white line through the centre. So that is the way I remember it. So one's got pale ring, dark line, one's got dark ring, pale line. Females, the same, slightly easier. In a female, the saddle marking is parallel-sided roughly in rotundum, and in black walleye, it's much more of a triangular saddle, but white ring, dark line in the centre, as opposed to rotundum, which is black ring with a white line in the centre. So very easy if you've got a hand lens to have a look at that. Sort of drawing to a close, Leobunum species I mentioned before, that's the kind of size of it against a standard house brick. Big lad, that's a male, very large things, very long limbs. There it is on my hand, there's one. So they're not small. This is the classic green bobber, comes in aggregations. I tend to think the female should be the gold bobber, because the females are beautiful. They're metallic gold colour, sometimes metallic green, dark patches, white patches, but often with this sort of beautiful golden sheen. So she's a beauty. Doesn't have a name yet, Leobunum species A. It's not far off, it's getting close to having a name. My colleagues in Germany and the Netherlands and Spain are working on that to try and locate where these things are actually from and give the thing a name. It probably won't be called the green bobber. I think we're all so used to Leobunum species A, I think we'd rather keep that now. But the males are spectacular, metallic green, fantastic things, and the orange underside. I really very fond of these. I walk past one on my way to work at the university most mornings through till they've gone now, but right to the end of December. And Laburnum limbatum was found in Lancashire in 2019 by Trevor Stone. It only occurs in a couple of places, maybe 3 sites in Lancashire currently. Huge, great big thing, long, long black legs, beautiful orange body, and the male with this black outline. It really is, I mean, I do not exaggerate when I say you have 2 hands to have this thing sitting on you. And females, beautiful sort of peachy orange with black and white patterning. Very attractive harvestman indeed. But that may well be spreading, so love to see any more records for that if anybody finds any. So long and short is, if you find any of those, iRecord is as good a way of recording them as any. I use iRecord and take a photograph if possible, and Meg Skinner will check those for you and verify them. So very active on iRecord now, so do that please. So coming to land finally. So apart from being ecologically significant, an important predator and a valuable prey item, very few of them to learn, easy to identify, they're easy to find, there are loads of resources to help you, they're available all year round, there are new discoveries to be made all the time, and they're really amazing to look at. What did harvestmen ever do for us? Well, they're harmless to humans. In addition, they eat garden and crop pests, so they're a useful predator in that respect. They're a good indicator of climate change. A number of studies, you can see these things where they've been recorded well, moving northward as climate has improved. They offer easily observed early warning of invasive species, because often where one invasive species arrives, there are others alongside them. And these are perhaps more obvious and easy to recognize than perhaps some of the other invasive things that are coming with them. So that's a value. If you conserve a site for these, then you're also benefiting other less obvious but equally essential and important species, in the same way that we protect great crested newts, partly to protect the ponds for other species. So conservation helps other things. They're very good in captivity, so they're a good research animal, and they're used for all sorts of things, but very good for sort of ecological and molecular biological studies, and they continue to be used for that as well. They've barely changed in 305 million years, those 400 million year old ones that we saw from Aberdeenshire, so that potentially 400 million years without much change. So they're very stable, evolutionarily speaking, and so they're very useful for sort of biogeographical and evolutionary research as well. If that wasn't enough, you can find lost cattle with them. I mean, this is what you've been waiting for. This is the information that you needed. You can find your lost cow by picking up a harvestman by 7 of its legs, and the last 8th leg, where that points, it will point to where the cow has got lost. That may not be true, I have to say. I'm just going by the information that I'm given. But hey, it's a use. So thank you. That's really all I've got to say. Do please carry on enjoying your various beetles and bugs and worms and butterflies, and trying to think who I've seen out there and what kind of groups you look at, but fine. But please occasionally do rest your gaze on my little friends, the harvestmen. Maybe try and identify a few from the resources I've suggested to you. Record 1 or 2 for us to help us improve our maps. And remember, they are very significant, they're a useful creature, and they are a sign of hope and good luck. So good luck everyone in trying to find some of these things and record them. Thank you. That's me done. There they go. Just a few British species.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was absolutely fantastic. And there are loads of messages coming into the chat, but people were just fascinated. Quite a few people didn't really know very much about Harvestmen, but your kind of enthusiasm and expertise has really excited people. So hopefully that's going to translate into lots more recording as well, which would be fantastic. And thanks for flagging up how people can go about recording. And that will be it's really important that people get interested in groups like this, because they're obviously very significant. We have run out of time, and we really don't have time for questions. The one I was going to ask, which was about how do people go about recording, but you kind of got to that in the end anyway. So I think what we will do is, that you're happy with that, is we'll pick up all those questions from the chat and we'll email them to you, and then we'll circulate that around to everybody. So we will get to everyone's questions, but I think we'll probably kind of need to finish off for now. But there's lots of, I don't know if you can see the chat yourself, but a great deal of appreciation. It was a really wonderful talk, and the photographs are just stunning. I had no idea about the amazing variety and the structures they have. They are absolutely amazing. So thank you very much.